Well, happy Tuesday, everybody. Today in our devotion, we are in the last chapter of 1 Samuel, chapter 31. Yes, we skipped chapters 29 and 30. You're welcome to read it, but for our purposes, today we are in chapter 31. And what I wrote at the top of my journal with this chapter is a tragic ending. Because it's in this chapter that Saul dies. Remember, God had rejected him as king. Back in chapter 28, he was told that he would die the following day when he's in battle with the Philistines, and that's what happens here in chapter 31. Saul is severely injured because the Philistines defeat the Israeli army. Saul is severely injured. His three sons, including Jonathan, are killed in battle. And to prevent the Philistines from torturing him, Saul ends up taking his own life by falling on his sword. The following day, the Philistines were going through all the bodies of the deceased Israelis and taking their clothing and their weapons and anything of value, the spoils of war, if you will. And they find the bodies of Saul and his three sons, and they stripped them of their armament and so on. And we're told that Saul, they beheaded him. They cut his head off, and then they shipped it throughout the different cities in the kingdom of the Philistines, if you will. And then they took his body as well as those of his three sons, and they attached them to a wall in a small, sparsely populated town. Now, whether or not they beheaded his sons, we're not told. They were definitely attached to the walls. It's possible they beheaded him, but we really don't know. So it's just, it's gory. It's a tragic story. And after that happens, word reaches some Jewish men who were loyal to Saul, and they walk overnight to this small town that's just not far from where the battle took place, and take down from the wall the bodies of Saul and his three sons, and they take them back to their home area, and they burn them in verse 12. So just look with me at verse 12 for a moment. The valiant men rose, walked all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. So they were cremated. Now, cremation was not common in Israel. Maybe it was a local custom for this one location where these men lived, but it was not at all common in Israel. In fact, in some circles, it was actually frowned on. But they cremated the bodies of King Saul and his three sons, including Jonathan, and then they took their bones and buried them there at Jabesh. And then they fasted 7 days as a sign of mourning. And I wrote in my journal a tragic ending, because it really is. But it didn't have to be that way. You remember back in chapter 10, the prophet Samuel anointed Saul as the first king of Israel, and actually said in verse 1 of chapter 10 that he was God's anointed. He was God's anointed, that God had chosen Saul and anointed him king. And in that moment, the truth is it did not have to end the way it did. But along the way, Saul made bad choices, and he sinned, ended up being rejected. And as a result, his life was tragic, and the ending of his life was tragic. Now, good people, godly people can die in a tragic accident. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about a tragic ending, it's the idea that you die, and yes, maybe the circumstances of death are horrific, but what really makes it tragic is the wasted potential, the thought of what could have been, the realization that sin and bad choices created a tragic life. And no matter how a person dies who has lived a tragic life, is a tragic death, because it just is like the final act. It's the closing of the door, the final chapter, a tragic ending to what had been a tragic life. But it didn't have to be that way. Whether your life is tragic and therefore your ending is tragic is determined by how you live. The decisions you make day by day determine the quality of your life and therefore how people feel when your life is over. Don't do like Saul. God has saved you and given you so much potential. Don't blow it. The decisions you make today are shaping your life and how people will remember and view your life. So make good, godly, wise decisions so that even if people are crying and hurting and grieving when you die, they will be rejoicing as they look over your life saying, that was a life well lived. So is your ending going to be one that has celebration or one that's seen as tragic because of how you live? The decisions you make along the way will determine that. God bless you. Thank you for watching or listening, and I'll see you tomorrow.